Something that I will say about this is that it almost made the list and actually was on my list at one point. We've taken a hammer to this point. At this point, Peter cut all that out.
Welcome to the Deep Bass Podcast, where we take a hard look at the element that makes or breaks games, the music. I'm Peter Thomas, and I'm joined by my co-host, Cody Haltom. We are happy to have you along with us through our journey through Red Faction Guerrilla. What's going on, Cody?
Hey, Peter, what's up?
Not much, man. I am nervous about this episode.
You and me both. Oh my God.
I know. The reason we're doing this isn't something we would normally cover, but the reason we're doing this is because we do have a guest today. I'd like to welcome Duran, a.k.a. Intrepid. What's going on, Duran?
Hey, peace family. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I have known Duran a very long time. We've been friends since the 9th grade, so it was only natural that I asked him to come on and talk about a game, and he picked a game that I was not ready for. What made you pick this game?
So when I was taking a step back to be like, okay, what should I pick? I think I originally threw at you 2K, and I threw at you. I think what I tried to stay away from was automatically going to my go-to of Metal Gear Solid, which, you know, that's my bag right there. But one of the reasons I picked this game because of the soundtrack in particular. Like, to me, this soundtrack takes you to places that, even if you've never played this, you probably just, I don't know, maybe it probably bring you into it. But it's just something different other than what you guys typically cover.
Admittedly, I was thinking that when I was inviting you on, I'm like, cool, we're going to get this Metal Gear Solid done. This is going to be it, man. I'm ready to go. And then he's like, oh yeah.
Curveball.
Yeah, and I was full on ready to do NBA with you until I realized that we were in the middle of all those like copyright strikes and crap like that, and I'm like, I don't want to mess with that. So
yeah, I'm sure that throws a whole boomerang into the situation, and you know, gets a little nasty, especially with a lot of people like, oh hey, I want money too, so give me what you owe.
Yeah,
you want to play my songs.
Yep, it definitely does. But I was pleasantly surprised. I was going through this soundtrack, and I'll get more into it as we go, but I definitely was caught off guard by how impressive this whole score was. It was very, very well done.
I plead the fifth.
You didn't like it? Wait a second. Hold up. Why?
I don't know why. It might be because, spoilers, but I haven't played this game. To go back to something that Duran had said, this would be like a type of game that we do want to cover. We do want to do shooters and things that, you know, that I haven't played that Peter has and vice versa. So this type of thing is something that we would have gotten around to, but maybe not this game specifically. But listening to this, I mean, we've heard some great and amazing soundtracks. And this one is the only one that, after listening to, 18 soundtracks at this point, not a single track got stuck in my head when I got done listening to it.
That's interesting. I do. So the thing is that I agree that the tracks themselves, they're not memorable enough to have them get stuck in your head, right? This is not something that's easily remarkable, how chiptune is or something like that, where you can just hum along to it. And I think the soundtrack is meant to be more atmospheric. So to me, I think of it like, and Duran, you and I were talking about this a little bit offline. It's like Resident Evil, right? You don't go around singing Resident Evil songs in your head, but those are damn good songs for that particular game.
Something I'll give the soundtrack, and what makes it as good as it does, and also in a way kind of might be where it falters a bit too. The entire time I was listening to the soundtrack, I was comparing it to other things. I could hear influences from other games and TV shows. Like I heard Halo, I'd heard Resident Evil, I heard Doctor Who, even just some bits and what I call influences, but similarities between them. And so I heard that, and I'm just like, this has all the makings to be awesome and outstanding, but I can't stop comparing it or hearing the other influences that I hear. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me. And I think I've made a few comparisons along the way, but I also do feel like even myself not having played this game either, I still feel like it stood on its own 2 feet and was a soundtrack that really complemented the kind of atmosphere that the game is trying to portray. So I saw a few video clips and read some of the description and summary of what the actual game was about. Plus, I have very light knowledge of the second game. So I kind of knew what I was getting into. And I feel like it does stand on its own 2 feet, but there were definitely a few comparisons, but I think that's just natural.
Yeah. In my research, I did a whole lot where I looked it up on Twitch. And for a game of this age, you can imagine, not a lot of people are playing it. The only person that was playing it there was one person, and the game was in Spanish the whole time. So I couldn't actually write. So like all the dialogue that was happening in the game and like in menus and stuff, all of it was in Spanish, which I naturally don't speak, or I speak very, very little of it. So I went into this pretty much completely blind. Like I think this game takes place on Mars, and I know that guns are in it, and that's really the extent of my knowledge about this game and this franchise.
My question for both of you guys would be, in that instance, what do you do? How do you get into a game like this, being though neither you guys have touched it? There's really no connection. So it's like, as you know, as a fan of you guys, I sit back and take in every episode and whatnot. But it's like this one, you guys don't have any knowledge on it. So, so what's the approach to something like this?
I'm the only one so far that's actually had to do this. Peter has played everything that we've covered to date, at least. So like, for example, when we did Undertale, I didn't know what Undertale was. I mean, I knew like the logo, but I mean, that was it really. And fortunately in that instance, Peter had actually played the game and it was up on his YouTube. So in that instance, when I got done with the soundtrack, booted up his playthrough, which took hours to get through, and I never got through the whole thing, but that way I would have some sort of connection to it, or some more idea kind of what the game was about. But because I've been so busy, I just didn't have time to actually go as deep into this like I normally would.
The core of the podcast is video game music. And while having the experiences of playing the game and knowing where these tracks land definitely helps with coming up with fun anecdotes and talking about our memories of what we were feeling at the time and things like that. At the core, it's still a music show, right? So when it comes down to it, it's not hard to sit down, listen to a soundtrack and analyze it critically. Even if you read just a brief note on what the game is about, you can at least say, at a minimum, this is fitting for this type of game, or this is not fitting for this type of game.
Yeah, sure. I will say to you guys, I hope this was one of the most challenging playbacks that you've heard.
It was definitely a different experience. Like Cody said, I've played every game that we've covered up to this point, except for this one. So I was actually really looking forward to it, a little nervous, but really looking forward to getting into it. And I'm glad I did, because I've got some thoughts about it towards the end, which I'll get into.
So it's going to be interesting to cover more shooters. I'm glad that we're finally covering one, but my reaction to this one being what is, and I'm sorry, it does make me nervous for what I learn about my own tastes and preferences going forward.
Fair enough.
What's funny is that we did cover a shooter. Episode 7, we covered GoldenEye.
Oh yeah,
GoldenEye. Yeah, you guys double us up.
But I think that even GoldenEye had a very different sounding soundtrack. It was less atmospheric and more trying to mimic what was in the movie. So even that was different than what we would get out of Red Faction or Halo or even Uncharted. So it is going to be interesting when we get to those episodes, what kind of dialogue comes out of that.
Yeah, I do agree. And that's a good pull. And Peter, we've now been podcasting long enough where I forgot about games that we covered. So congrats to us, man.
That's hilarious.
We're going to get into the game history here. And then afterwards, I'm going to ask you guys about your memories, which once again, I believe Cody is going to take the longest talking about his whole history with this game. Red Faction Guerrilla is a third-person shooter video game developed by Volition and published by THQ. It was released for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in June 2009 and for Microsoft Windows in September of 2009. The game is the third installment in the Red Faction series, as the player takes the role of Alec Mason as he assists the Red Faction to overthrow the oppressive Earth Defense Force, shortened to EDF, on Mars. A remastered version titled Red Faction Guerrilla Remastered Edition with improved graphics was released worldwide on July 3rd, 2018 for Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One, and on July 2nd, 2019 for the Switch, which I actually just found that out when I put these notes together. So that might be where I try this game out. Timothy Michael Wynn composed the cinematic score to Guerrilla's pre-rendered CGI cutscenes, while Jake Kaufman handled the majority of the looped micro scores that played dynamically during the ambient and combat gameplay. Material including contributions by Raison Varner and Dan Wentz. George Oldziey and Wentz composed additional music to complement further gameplay scenarios. The release received positive reception, with Square Enix Music giving the album 9 out of 10, praising Wynn's main theme, its fusion of orchestral and futuristic electronic music, as well as the low price for the vast amount of material. And I thought it was really interesting to see that of all of the notes that were compiled into like Wikipedia and things like that, that Square Enix Music was the group that they cited giving this a high score. I didn't even know they reviewed tracks all like that.
Wait, Square?
Yeah. So Square Enix Music kind of has its own division where it releases all the soundtracks for its titles. So I've purchased Octopath Traveler and a couple other soundtracks of theirs from it. But yeah, it was cited as them giving the album a 9 out of 10.
That may be a foreshadow for some of you fans out there, because if Square Music is giving it a 9 out of 10, I don't know.
Clearly, I'm in the wrong is what we're getting at here. Got it. Appreciate it, friends.
We're right on brand. We're right on brand here, man. This is like where everybody knows this is a good soundtrack, and Cody just hates it for no other reason other than he just hates it.
I'm still trying to figure out what's to that. Like, why do you hate it so much, man?
I don't hate it. I don't want this getting misconstrued. You know, it's like Cody doesn't like Final Fantasy 13. No, he does. I just don't have the need to play it again. You know, this is kind of the same thing. It's like, I'm not saying that this is terrible or even bad. I'm just saying that I was underwhelmed by it. Or, all right, well, I heard that once and that was good. I don't need this on repeat necessarily. It's more that.
Fair enough. I mean, it was what, a 3-hour stream. Okay. Oh my Lord. It's a lot of songs, but
I want to tell you something that happened. And this was a couple of episodes ago. I was asking what your pick was, and Peter told me, and I looked up the soundtrack and I was like, thank God that man put a short soundtrack on here, because I was looking at, you know, the track list only having like 30 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then I opened up the playlist and it's like 3 hours. And I'm like, that mother, I was so upset. I was like, this is, I mean, I can knock it out. It's not a super, super long listen, but I went from being so proud of you to so angry really quick.
Yeah. So when I was asked to come on with you guys, I even gave it a listen, and I listened to it twice just to make sure. Boy, oh boy, that was tough. But I will say, usually when I listen to podcasts or any like long music or watching long videos, I usually work out to it or try to go for a walk or try to make it somewhat digestible, if you will. Because I mean, that is a lot of music to take in and a lot of different directions that some of these songs go, and it can throw you off, really.
I want to hear a bit more about your history with this, Duran. So tell me what got you started into Red Faction as a whole, and particularly Red Faction Guerrilla. First time you played it, thoughts, experiences. Tell me a little bit about that.
I would have to begin with Red Faction 1, the very first game. It's one of those games to me that's like, this was completely different. I've never even owned a game like that. I think when I got it, it was just a gift to me of just some type of shooter game. Here, have some fun, go to your room, if you will, and just have at it. So I got that first game, and I noticed that not only is it you're like this union worker who's fighting back against the system, your oppressors, whatever else, but the weapons in particular is what made this game super cool. And it gives you that GoldenEye type of feel, that perfect dark type of feel when you play the multiplayer. So you're running around, you're killing bots, and you're just doing your thing. And that's just within the first game. And then the second game drops. And not only are the weapons cooler than the first game, but they are way cooler than the first game. And they also updated the multiplayer to where you and a buddy can play, and all you and all your friends, depending on the console at that time you had, you guys can all pretty much just go crazy in a free-for-all, every man for himself type of kill fest, if you will. But one weapon stood out to me in particular, and that was the railgun. The railgun mixed with, if you also had a rocket launcher, my go-to tactic would be to blow a hole as deep as you can get it without it, the game just saying no more. And then I would go down there and I would sit in there with my railgun, and the railgun was like a thermal, I don't even know how to describe it, but you can pretty much shoot anyone through anything, anywhere. And that to me was like the most epic sniper type of gun. It even blew the regular sniper out of the water. But to play through that and, play with you actually, Peter, as well as other kids we used to play with in high school, different multiplayer sessions of, if your buddy had a GameCube, there's 4 of us on the GameCube and we're all playing Red Faction 2. Even when you play through the story of both 1 and 2, the story to me has always been just kind of middle of the road. Yes, it had pretty good moments, but yes, it also had very, very poorly written moments in it, but still awesome games 1 and 2. And then you get to this third one. You're no longer in your first person mode. You're more in the third person. You actually get to see your character of who you are. You actually have a name, Alec, and you actually can do everything you were doing in the first 2 games, but you can really destroy everything that's out there. You're on Mars, yes, but some of the weapons that you're still using, and I think that's what it is to me about this game, or even this entire series, is the weapons are so cool. I don't really play too many games that have these type of weapons or this level of weapon. I will say maybe the precursor to some of the other titles we get and some of the crazy weapons that we may get in these newer titles.
Going into my history, because it's really all tied with you. The only time I played this game was with you. I mean, we used to have nights where I'd stay over a couple nights here and there, and we would pop this on, play it all hours of the night into the morning. It was not my first experience with multiplayer first person shooter sessions like that at all, but the first time I played anything this unique and this wild, I distinctly remember that railgun, because it would be like a fight for us to see who would get it first and just pick each other off, because you're right, it almost has like an infrared / thermal view. When you look through the scope of it, you could see like this colored body of the person that you were trying to kill, and went through walls, went through everything. It was almost a one shot every time. So
it was.
Yeah, it was. I do remember that. I think the most distinctive thing that I remembered from these games was then the weapons, because they did have some pretty wild weapons that didn't fall under the normal, like it wasn't just like a handgun and a shotgun and the rocket launcher and like call it a day. Yeah. As far as Red Faction 3 goes, I never played it. It was never really on my radar. I've mentioned it before in the podcast. I'm not a huge first-person shooter guy. It has to be a pretty special game in order for me to get into it. I obviously loved Borderlands, but this game just never really hit it for me. Though after listening to this soundtrack, I think that might change.
I mean, 9 out of 10, man, they can't be wrong.
Yeah, right. It's Square Enix who's talking about this. And if anybody knows their music, it's Square. So Cody, why don't you...
Wink, Cody.
Yeah, Cody, tell us about your history.
I saw this on the shelf a lot when I worked at GameStop.
And that's the end of that.
Something I do want to know about that, though, because, I mean, it is true. I always associated this game with Xbox. I have no idea that it even came to PlayStation.
See, when I played the very first two, it was both on PlayStation. When I played the third one, this is long before the remastered edition, it was on 360. So I don't know if there was a particular reason why I got it for 360. And maybe it was being pushed on 360 only, because I was talking to a couple of friends and they were like, yeah, I do remember that game on 360. And I was like, why doesn't anyone remember it on the PS3? So that's one of those things where I was like, I don't really remember it being on the PS3, or I would have grabbed it for the PS3 because I owned the PS3.
Yeah, I think for me, obviously with no context to it, where our counter was directly across was the pre-owned Xbox section. And I just remember seeing, I'm looking at the soundtrack album cover right now. And I mean, it's the same as what's on the cover of the game. I know that image so well, but I never picked it up once.
I was thinking the same thing. When I saw the cover art for it, I do remember seeing it a lot everywhere, but ironically, the same thing. I remember seeing it a ton for 360 and never seeing it for PlayStation. So I don't know. Maybe it was just more prevalent there. I mean, the Xbox in general was geared more towards the mature or adult gamer, so to speak. Maybe that's why we saw more of it there than on PlayStation. I'm not sure. Well, we are going to get started here on our music lists. I wanted to note this because this is the first time it's happened in 19 episodes, but not a single one of us overlapped our music.
Hey, clap it up for the guys.
I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah, I got home from work and I opened up the doc to see what you guys have put, and I was like, oh, there's no overlap? Okay, this is going to be a longer episode than I thought. Here we go.
Yeah, kind of wild. It makes me wonder, with you and I not going into this, having played this game, we're now relying more on our musical preferences rather than experiences in the game. Whereas Duran has the experiences with the game, so he kind of has some familiarity there. So I feel like, and I could be totally wrong by the time we get into the discussions of all of this, but Duran's picks are probably going to be more emotional and speaking more from his feelings throughout the game, whereas yours and mine, Cody, are going to be more like, this is why it appealed to me from a musical standpoint.
Right, and more of our musical taste as well. So what we can say is Peter has the right music list. Duran has the best list for the people who have actually played the game, and we can just throw mine away because it's garbage. Got it.
Man, I wouldn't say that's the safest bet, but I will say that there is a method to my madness in the songs I chose.
Well, I want to start hearing about that madness. So as our guest, why don't you kick us off and tell us your number 5?
So my number 5 was Condemnation. This is a track by, I think you pronounce it Oldziey. Is that how you pronounce them?
That's how I read it. I don't know if it's correct.
When I put it in Google Speech or whatever that software is, they pronounce it Oldziey, which, very well could be his name. I could be really, really wrong by that. And I'm super sorry to you, man. I really respect you and I respect what you put out on this project. And I don't want to mispronounce your name. I know how bad it can be. But Oldziey and Wentz did a phenomenal job to me on this track. To me, it was super hard. And I mean, oh man, it was gritty, dark. It had like doom and gloom chords, suspenseful moments. It also like gave your ear a little bit of hopeful melodies. And it was like to me, in my opinion, like the rise of the most evil situation that's about to happen. And hopefully you get your business taken care of.
Is this an early game track or a late game track? Do you remember?
So when I was talking to Pete about this, I don't really remember when all these songs came into play because it's like I'm just playing the game. And
Right.
This is why I respect your guys' podcast so much because it's like, oh wow, there is a soundtrack in there, and I now need to pay attention to that. So when I was going back, even listening to some of these moments, yeah, I felt like I caught glimpses of, oh yeah, okay, I remember that, or I don't really remember that song, but maybe that did happen. And to Peter's point earlier, when we were talking about it off stream, he was saying that a lot of these songs do come in as ambient noise and you wouldn't even notice it.
Right.
Good point, especially when you're playing a shooter. So to Peter's point, man, that was an awesome take. So
Yeah.
I don't really
Okay.
remember when and where these songs happen.
The only reason why I was asking is because like you are my conduit to this game. Like, and I totally, as a shooter fan, I totally get what you're saying, where shoot, you might not have even really paid attention to it. The reason why I was asking is as I was listening to it, you described it being an uprising, kind of what what is generally going on in the game. And this is kind of what you think of as kind of like a one-to-one. I found that interesting because it does happen so late in the soundtrack. It's like track number 25 or something out of 32. So that was just an interesting placement or whatever in terms of where it fell, because I would imagine that this would be much earlier in the game based off your memories with it.
And also, like I said, there was a method to my madness. When I listened to this the second time through, I found a pocket that I really liked between Oldziey and Wentz, and I kind of stayed in that pocket. And you guys, as we go forward, you'll see more and more of these two in particular of what I really, really loved of them. So hopefully, as we move on, you guys will get to hear a little bit more about it.
Whenever I think of a game like Red Faction and what I know of it, this is definitely the kind of track that I expect. I labeled it pretty similarly to how you did, Duran. I said, I'm looking for that gritty, stuck in the trenches kind of sound that this track provides. There are a lot of dramatic horn blasts throughout the song, which to me signifies, it signifies something pretty substantial going on at this particular part of the game, even if I don't know where it's at. Maybe it's a conflict of some sort or some sort of point of contention. But you couple that with the tremolo of the strings that you hear, and you're given a really epic sounding track that I'm surprised only made it to number 5 because of how good it sounds. But that was long before I listened to the rest of the soundtrack and realized that, well, most of it does sound good. So, okay, I get it.
Yes, indeed, man. Yes, indeed.
Cody, why don't you tell us your number 5?
An absolute banger indeed, my friends. My number 5 is Bar Radio Loop Sketches. This track on any other soundtrack wouldn't make my list, and we all know that. I'm assuming that there is a bar in the game where you can change what track plays on the radio. This is basically every one of those tracks just shortened and butted up against each other. As it plays, you hear everything from metal to techno, and then you hear it out of freaking nowhere, the Cantina theme from Star Wars. I mean, it's not the real Cantina theme, but it's the freaking Cantina theme. I'm not a huge Star Wars nerd, but hearing this come on totally caught me off guard and got an actual laugh out of me.
In my opinion, Cody, I feel like you're kind of cheating with that pick because there's like so many awesome things happening within that track in particular. But you're 100% right. It's fun. It's quirky. It does have a little bit of just other elements of different games or even different movies. I felt like they had a good time putting that together. So
yeah, for sure.
I think you hit that one on the head, man. That's a good number 5.
Yeah, these were really cool. More of a novelty than anything. And I feel like maybe had I played the game, I might have put these on, but just as a standalone, not really my thing. Like you, Cody, I imagine that there was probably some old rundown bar somewhere with a jukebox in it that lets you play these tracks or something along those lines. This song and a few others, like you mentioned, were really long. And that's likely because what they ended up doing and what I found out was that they took the samples from specific parts of it and put them all into one track as opposed to separate individual tracks for each one. I'll get more into that a little bit later because both myself and you have one later on our list with a similar concept. The songs that I had heard off of these, like new age dance, almost slightly hip hop and house sounding tracks, they do well capturing the setting that is in that futuristic world that Red Faction tends to sit in. And I really enjoyed that. I don't remember the particular metal ones that you were talking about, but I definitely heard a lot of the electronic, the dance, hip hop, house, you name it. It seemed to be pretty eclectic when I was listening to it.
Yeah. It was more rock than it was metal. And I just put down metal in my notes because, it's me. So there's that. One thing that you had said, and I think I get the phrasing of this right, is that you think that it might have been on your list had you played the game. And what's interesting for me is I think that if I would have played the game, there's not a chance in hell that this would make it on my list. This would have been a nice little Easter egg, little novelty thing. But these tracks aren't going to be what I remember after I've turned the game off and I've like gone to school or something. This isn't going to be what sticks in my head. All right, buddy. What is your number 5?
My number 5 is Uprising. Similar to you, Duran, I will say this now that I am starting my list and ending my list with a Tim Wynn song because he took his experience from the film scores that he has done prior and brought it to this game in such a brilliant way. I did do the same thing you did where I looked at my list of songs and saw who made them. And believe it or not, I actually have pretty much a song from everybody. I have one on there from Jake Kaufman. I've got one on there from Oldziey and Wentz. I've got one on there from Varner. He's on there as well. And then I've got two from Tim Wynn. So I definitely leaned more towards Tim on these. And there was something that I really loved about it. And just starting with this track alone, when you're listening to it, you're basing this off of the story, which is there is a organization that is looking to overthrow another organization. And there's a song called Uprising sitting on that track list. It's like, it's such a good fit. The build up into this song all the way through to the 1 minute mark where it kind of levels out. It's like a minute and 10 seconds in where it levels out, and it makes me think of a before and after of the start of something really epic, and lets me know that this is going to be a big endeavor, and this adventure is going to be very long and arduous and tiresome, and people are going to die, but it's going to be very worth it. The entire time you're doing it, buckle up, because it's going to be one hell of a journey.
I think that's fair to say, Peter. When I was sitting back listening to your song, the same words came to my mind as epic. This sounds epic. This is a moment they've captured. I will say your producer of choice did a good job in that. Also, why I felt like you picked this track in particular, I feel like it leaned into your Nintendo side a little bit. And when I say Nintendo, because in my notes I put Nintendo-esque, it just sounded very Star Foxy to me. I don't know, but I was like, you know what? Peter's going to pick this song.
Okay, you guys kind of describing it or giving more context does make me appreciate it more. My only note for this when I first listened to it was literally, I kind of like it. I did. That was it. That was all I had put down, if I wanted to come back and listen to it or not. I love the trumpet in this, though. It's shockingly short for this soundtrack, though. Just this track in general, because, I mean, dear God, there are some long tracks on this thing. Something Peter had said, bringing up Tim Wynn, was that he was a composer in film as well. So I did a quick IMDb search to be like, all right, well, there's got to be something that I know of his where I can be like, oh, he's the guy who did this. No, I got nothing. I know nothing other than this game and like Command and Conquer that he has even touched. So I'm at a complete loss on his work.
I agree fully with what you said, Duran, that it does have a very Star Fox vibe. And I think that leans into the fact that these big orchestral soundtracks are kind of the way that Star Fox is built. So I heard that too. And I actually almost made the comparison, but I was like, no, I'm trying not to compare too many of my tracks to other games because I don't want to do that. I want this to, as it does, stand on its own 2 feet. So I definitely understand that feeling, though, of hearing kind of that, how'd you call it, Nintendo-esque roots.
Right. Just making stuff up, huh?
Yeah, it's all right, man. That's what we do here. We have sleep songs and Nintendo-esque and all kinds of other fun little terminology. But for what you were saying, Cody, I did the same thing. So when I found out that this guy did movie scores, I was like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense because this sounds like it belongs in a movie. All of his tracks only apply to CGI scenes. Like he does not do a damn thing during the game itself. It's just all for the cutscenes that come through the game. I looked through his list of movies that he did, just films, and also had no clue of any of his films, but he's good. I wish he did do more stuff because I think he's a fantastic composer and put this together really, really well.
Yeah, Wynn did an amazing job for that song.
All right, I'm just glad I'm not the only one who had no idea what he had worked on before, so that's great.
All right, Duran, what is your number 4?
All right, my number 4 is Lamb to Slaughter. This is, again, that same pocket, Oldziey and Wentz. They made me really, really comfortable in this song. Again, when you first hear it and it's first starting off, you get this feeling of maybe just floating into an area, and it kind of lends into the title of Lamb Before the Slaughter. It's like you think of just fluffiness, you think of just beautiful scores, and it's just bringing it in right before you go and get killed, pretty much. To me, this track tells a story of just that Red Faction character. So this is Alex's story right here of he is your hero, your go-to guy, but he's about to face some serious trials and tribulations throughout this game. And I feel like they captured that moment perfectly with this track right here.
This almost made my list, but for different reasons. It's a gorgeous track, especially like when it starts. It is very, I don't know if light is the right term, almost heroic in a way.
Okay. I like it.
But there is a certain doom aspect to it as the track goes on, and they kind of play with each other back and forth. And from a music standpoint, the name matches what's actually happening in the track, which doesn't always happen, which I'll talk about later. But yeah, this almost made my list.
Honorable mention. I like it.
There you go.
The start of this track, I was actually wondering if I was still listening to Red Faction or if Donkey Kong was making a very epic return. I know I said I wasn't going to compare the tracks to other games, but I just meant mine because I do it quite a bit with your guys's. If I was taking a guess, I was saying that it sounded very much like a final boss battle or just before a boss battle of some sort. There are some choir vocals in here that add a really nice touch, but what really stood out to me is how much supporting instrumentation they use to bring it all together. They could have left the main melody on this and it would have been a great track. But adding in those hits of the bells and what sounded like a pipe being struck to give it kind of like an industrial vibe really take this track to the next level for me.
Man, I have to agree with you 100% there. It does fall into place exactly how you put it. To me, like I said, it was a strong pick. And I think that's where these two producers come together so well. And like I said, as I continue on, you'll hear more and more probably from these guys.
It is time for my number 4, which is Grinder. Nobody can tell me that this track wasn't heavily influenced by the Resident Evil soundtrack. Not the game, but the movie. That movie came out when I was in high school, and young me was all over that soundtrack. The prologue and main theme titles in particular were go-tos for me. From the very light noises at the start to a distorted guitar as it builds, I can just hear a connection between these two. I know the tracks sound nothing alike, but I can clearly hear a connection, or I could just be crazy.
I wonder, is that a question that you feel that you're crazy?
Oh, no. I'm crazy. I know that. like that's a given. No one else is going to make that connection, and I don't care. None of the people are the same. None of the composers are the same. But this is another track that I hear it, and I'm like, I hear something else. We've been talking about this a lot, and that's kind of what makes this soundtrack more of a hodgepodge than it is like one consecutive piece, because it does kind of just seem so disjointed in terms of where not in terms of like the soundtrack itself, because it's concise, it is what it is, but just I hear so many heavy influences from elsewhere that at a certain point I was like, I'm going crazy. Like, can I stop? And this was one of those where I'm like, I know I'm going to be the only person in the world who's going to make this connection, but I don't care, and I stand by it. So there it is.
So Cody, I will give you this. I feel like majority of these songs feel like they've been pulled from this game or that game, or pushed into a different type of game. I don't know, but I'm kind of with you there. Your number 4, Grinder, to me, in my opinion, it was a cool bop, very slow, just chill music. I put in my notes that it kind of snaps in and just provides vibes. This wasn't my favorite song on the soundtrack, but I did like this song. It was smooth. Again, I don't really know how else to describe it. It was just a smooth track. I was pleased with it.
Yeah, the way this track starts, and mind you, when I'm putting all my notes together, I usually put them together first before I go back, read anybody else's, and put some talking points that I want to hit on. But I thought that this track reminded me of a horror track. That was up until that guitar kicks in, and it's like the rock song that I didn't know that I needed. Cody, after coming off Final Fantasy 13 just this last episode, did you not get some heavy snow vibes here?
Do you know what? I didn't even think about that. Holy crap, you're right.
Yeah, it was like I listened to it and I'm like, again, I could be biased because we just finished Final Fantasy 13 2 weeks ago, but it's like I felt like I was listening to a new edition of Snow's theme all over again. I really enjoyed this. I didn't put it on my list because I felt like it was a bit too simplistic in nature, but I could have seen myself really enjoying it, at least when I heard it in the game at that particular moment. But I went in and I went to YouTube and found the song you were talking about. The intros do sound oddly similar. They're not a 1-to-1 for sure. The two,
No.
at whatever point, either the guitar in this song or in the other one, it stays pretty ambient. They definitely break off, and you can tell that they're part of their own venture, so to speak. But one of the things that I really enjoyed about this track is that at 1 minute and 38 seconds in, the guitar goes away entirely, and the track switches over to almost like an atmospheric sound. Like you were saying, Duran, just really cools out. Everything is just very calm, and it's a very strange type of transition for a shooter game in general. You don't expect things to get that relaxed. But
Definitely.
when a song like that can do that, like this one does, and almost effortlessly, I have to tip my hat off to the composer for making it work. You've mentioned this now for the tracks that have come out, but the synergy between these composers,
Man, Oldziey and Wentz, man. I'm telling you guys.
yeah, it's incredible.
And this is Cody's pick.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, I started off, I was thinking, but I was like, I think it's the same composers who did this one. It's just not your pick. But either way, the synergy between those two is just, I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, they did an awesome job, man.
All right. What is your number 4?
My number 4 is Poltergeist. Admittedly, I was drawn to the song just from the name alone. I wanted to hear if there were any more horror-esque type tracks on here, but instead I was greeted with one of the coolest little riffs that I had heard throughout the soundtrack. So this was kind of like an accidental pick. I chose it and was listening to it, and I'm like, actually, I kind of like this. I'm going to stick it on here.
Not an accidental.
Yeah, it was an accidental. It was an accidental bop. I almost get some Deus Ex vibes with it. It sort of does have an eerie sound when the violins come in, and they do this thing where, and I don't know the technical term for this one, but it's where they drag the bow across the string and they slide their finger along the string as well to kind of give it that, it's like a screech sound. The composers didn't break form. This sounds like it belongs in a futuristic shooter, with some of the more industrial sounds making an appearance again. And there's even some like laser sounds that come in really later to just solidify and drive that vibe home.
Again, these are my guys, man. This is Oldziey and Wentz. This was a comfortable space for me, even though it was one of your picks. But again, it was towards the end of the soundtrack list where I was like, man, I really do vibe with this song as well. I don't know if that was, again, just how these two work together, but it was another one of those smooth, vibey type of songs. I also said that it kind of gives you like a low club music type of feel. Maybe it was supposed to be dark, but I didn't really see the darkness in it. I thought it was just a really good job by these two again. I mean, they've had a field day with this whole soundtrack.
I could definitely hear some of that club vibe for sure. Not anything heavy, but kind of the undertones for it for sure.
I think the main thing that makes it feel as eerie as it does is the violence. I think you take those out and you're going to lose a large chunk of what makes this the hair standing up kind of feeling that you get from this track. I didn't jive with it that much, but I was kind of like you, Peter. I saw it and it's one of those, ooh, I want to like that. Like when we did Undertale, there was one track that I think was called a tiny bird helps you
crosses a river or something. Yeah.
Right. Like crosses a gorge. And I saw that track listing and I was like, man, I got to put it on my list. I got to. And then listening to it and, can't in good faith. So I'm glad you had one of those moments because I'm still waiting on one, damn it.
All right, Duran, let's hear your number 3.
Man, the way you said number 3, that's a huge ordeal for me. So
yes, I
my
do.
number 3 is Accused, again, by my 1 and 2 right here, Oldziey and Wentz. When it first starts off, it gives you a nice hi-hat, brings that in really strong, really quick, kind of aggressive, but there's still like a darkness to this. This was a safe pocket for me. I don't know why. Maybe I'm attracted to more of that darker, more evil, gritty type of sound to these guys. They also added like this quick suspenseful horn in there. It just looks like the title is within the song. Like we're looking for someone to blame. Are you the accused? This is how I felt about that song.
Shout out to the hi-hat, as always, the percussion nerd in me. Listening back to this track, it's almost like you're running. You're being chased in a way. It's very grungy to a degree. Not so much the hi-hat and the lighter parts we get with some of the horns. Underneath it all, there's this sinisterness to this where listening to it, I just assumed that you were just getting chased through like a building or something. I had no idea what was going on, but mentally that's kind of where this track took me.
You guys are going to laugh so hard at my notes for this.
Oh God.
Oh man, what you got on the paper, man?
I mean, I don't even have to say anything because both of you basically covered all the things I had, but I know I said I was surprised at the beginning of this episode that we didn't do Metal Gear Solid for you, Duran. But This song almost fits the bill as a perfect track for a tactical espionage game. The fast hi-hats and the deep horns makes for an anxiety-filled run in what could be an escape zone or something similar in another game. About the 40-second mark, what sounds like very deep baritones come in and provide such an ominous tone to this track. And what's really funny is while I don't know the story to this game, I feel like I'm in some sort of interrogation room trying to talk my way out of a crime that I was either legitimately or illegitimately accused of. So literally all the things, the hi-hat, the running, the anxiety, and the interrogation. It's like you guys literally nailed it all. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how I felt. And again, I hate to harp on this, but it really should be said, is that I believe that somebody is a great composer if you can play a song to 3 different people with 3 different experiences on a game and have the exact same outcome come from it. Like, that is a fantastic track.
Man, it's good, man. Again, my 3 should be my number 1, but it's my number 3.
I know. But hey, it just means they're only getting better from here, right?
Yes, sir. I got a couple more up my sleeve.
Cody, why don't you tell us what your number 3 is?
All right, Duran, I want you to know that I took these notes before knowing that you were A, Metal Gear Solid fan, and B, that was in the conversation, okay? My number 3 is Subvert. This track starts deceptively soft and light, but it doesn't take long to pick up. This sounds straight out of Metal Gear Solid, man. There's just something about those underlying notes that really drives that feeling home to me. Eventually, the track kicks into a more action-driven segment, which only amplifies all of this to another level, especially with the violins. I have no idea what is happening in this part of the game, but I hope it's somewhere close to how this track makes me feel.
I have to give it to you, Cody. I did get some Metal Gear vibes from your track in particular. It was just a smooth bop that went into this epic darkness. And once it started to get into that darkness, the bass was so heavy. And I have a couple studio monitors, and it was rocking those, man. So this is another one. A good song to me. Very, very good song to me, actually.
If you had stripped away all of the music from this and just kept the synth parts, I would have still said this was an awesome pick. Very similarly, I got some very serious 007 vibes, which again, going back to espionage and spies and things like that, it kind of all fits the bill. But right at the minute and 20-second mark, the strings kick in and I'm like in a whole new song altogether. That was easily my favorite part about this track. And I listened to it a few times just to hear that transition more because I really loved what they did there.
Yeah, honestly, I didn't even pay attention to the synth that much. And this is going to be another one of those shame on Cody things. I did make that Metal Gear Solid note. I have not played Metal Gear Solid.
What
Jesus
is going on?
All right.
Hey, I didn't have a PlayStation 1, okay? Until like much later in life. So blame
tough.
that.
Did you have a PlayStation 2?
No excuses.
Did you have a PlayStation?
Peter, don't you give him an out. No.
No, I'm not giving him an out. I'm giving him a reason that he should have. If he had a PlayStation 2, they played PlayStation 1 games. If you had a PlayStation 3 early enough, well, no, you skipped that generation. So I know you didn't have that. But you had a PlayStation 4 and it was available digitally as a PS1 classic. There's no excuse for you have never played this game.
Shame on Cody. Oh, Lord.
I did back in the day I did get Nintendo Power, but I also got the official PlayStation magazine, and it had a demo disc for one of the sequels. It was one of the ones that was on PlayStation 2. I couldn't tell you which one. The guy was green, and it was in a jungle. And I could not get into the stealth. Like I just can't stand stealth. It's my only issue with Legend of Zelda Wind Waker is the stealth in the beginning. But yeah, that's the reason why I've never even tried to get into it, is because it just doesn't look like a game for me. That's all.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but that was a Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater.
Oh, well, now I know. Thank you. I still have that disc somewhere in my apartment.
I still have it somewhere. Ouch, the disrespect.
Just so you guys know, at the end of the episode, we will be taking applications for that spot that Cody is sitting in right now. So whenever you're ready to fill Cody's role as my co-host, who has actually played good games, let me know.
I have played good games. You shut up. All right, Peter, what is your number 3?
My number 3 is Vindication Combat. There are several tracks on this album that combine a bunch of smaller segments or loops into one massive track. I talked about that with Cody's number 5, and we'll talk about it again later. But what you're given is a series of tracks that sound similar, but have few elements that stick out here and there. So they basically have each individual loop that they use. So instead of the game having in a specific area, so whatever this Vindication area is, instead of having the combat sections have the exact same track, they cycled them. Each time you got into a battle with somebody, or there was some enemies that were up ahead or something, they would switch to a new part of this same style of track. Where this track particularly shines out are the loops that start at 4 minutes and 19 seconds and 9 minutes and 5 seconds. The first one is just a really sweet breakdown that reminds me of like busting into a building, kicking it down the door, and just tearing shit up. The second one, however, just takes the tempo knob and twists it all the way up. And it becomes this fast-paced, sweat beating down your forehead run and gun moment that excites me more than I care to admit. Of note, there are 2 other sets of tracks like Vindication where there's a combat version and an ambience version. And what I adore about them is that they pair really well together, because if you listen to the ambience version and then listen to the combat, the ambience is a calmer, kind of between the action style music meant to fill in that space when there are no enemies and you're just kind of exploring or getting to the next area. And musically, they sound like they're a pair together, which is really quite satisfying. I like that the calm nature of them sounds very much like the combat nature, so that they can basically transition. So I imagine that in the game while you're playing, the 2 are probably flawlessly switching back and forth in action moments, out of action moments, and so forth.
Again, I think you're on point with that one, my man. I heard the track when I was going back and looking at the notes and everything. I feel like this does sound like something is happening, a battle of some sort of combat, and it does pair well with the ambient side of it. It's really tough to follow up what you say behind that, because I'm seeing it the exact same way you see it. So it didn't make my list, but it's another one of those strong songs to me that, oh, wow, these guys know what they're doing. And this combination, I want to say, who was it? Kaufman, Varner, and Wentz, I think, were the three that were working on these back-to-back tracks like that. But it's just they did an awesome job. They were on point, and whoever decided to make both versions, the flow of both of the tracks goes really well too, but also gives you that feeling. And I think that's what's really awesome about what they captured in this game, is that when it's time for combat, you're getting that combat sound. I don't know if that makes sense, but I sure hope it does.
So Duran, when you say that I describe a song and you find it hard to follow up because I describe it so well, are you really, what you're saying is that I just do my job really well, right?
Man, I got to give you that. Yes, you do. You're doing an awesome job in that because, again, like I said, like you nailed it.
I just want to put it out in the world, let everybody know that I am doing a fantastic job and Cody is not.
Oh,
that's all.
Man. Oh, man.
I knew it was coming. I knew the lob was in the air.
I had to just build it up, Cody. That's all.
Do not put me in that. I see the arguments on the Discord. Please don't put me in that.
Peter, I just wanted to point out, this is a really good moment in this track, and I don't know how I missed it. And then I started thinking about it. It's probably because these tracks are so damn long. We've covered long tracks on deep bass, but none as long as these. We're talking 15, 16-minute long tracks. These tracks are so long that we're having to put timestamps as to what moments in the track we're actually talking about so people can hear it. And that to me is nuts.
Yeah, I think the longest tracks we've done were Celeste, and those topped out at somewhere around the 10 to 11 minute mark. So, this got it beat by another 35, 40% more.
Yeah.
Oh man. So the fans get to hear me put you guys to work.
Yeah. This was a doozy for sure.
I love it.
All right, Duran, what is your number 2?
I think it's safe to say that my number 2 track comes from Oldziey and Wentz. Again, this song is called Faction. As it comes in, the song is super smooth, super calming. The strings and the horns are carrying you through most of this song. To me, it sounds like it should be the intro track to this game, or it maybe even like the menu music. I don't know, but it just sounds like not only does the title of this game mean something, but then you get the title of this song that kind of go hand in hand together. So maybe we should bring the game in with Faction. I don't believe they did, but Faction to me is that intro song, if you will. But it pretty much just defines this game.
Okay, I can hear it. I can hear menu music vibes, but I doubt that's where this takes place. It is more not calm, but it's less energetic than a lot of the action that's going along in some of the other tracks on the soundtrack. I mean, this is an energetic soundtrack from beginning to end for the most part. I can understand you associating this track with this game because not all soundtracks have to have this big over the top masterpiece of a track for you to identify it with this or with the game, and this is proof of that. So I can definitely hear what you're saying. Like whenever you think about this game, this is one of the top tracks that you think about.
So interestingly enough, I have all these notes written down for this particular track. And I realized I had to take a quick 2-minute breather here because everything I wrote down did not match up with a single thing that either of you two had said. So I paused for a second on the podcast and I went back to listen real fast. And I realized that I must have accidentally clicked on the wrong song and wrote notes for that instead.
Oh, I want to hear those anyway.
Yeah, what song did you?
So I wrote it for one of Tim Wynn's song, and I thought that you had a Tim Wynn song on here, and I was like, so you started talking about Oldziey and Wentz, and I'm like, wait, something's not jiving right. I had to go over and listen to it really quickly to hear what track I had messed this up on. But one of the things that I got from this when I did hear it was that these guys have a vibe that they stick with. So it's almost like the developers put Oldziey and Wentz on the tracks that they needed something that was like almost underground sounding. There's a lot more utilization of that. I don't even know what instrument it is. It sounds like they're banging on some pipes, but it sounds musical. It's not like annoying or anything like that. So there's a lot of like clanking that make this sound very undergroundish, but they have a vibe that they stick with. And I can see now why your tracks kind of all fall in line with that.
Yes, sir, man. To me, these guys are what I like just in music in general. So it's like, if you can bring me some of those, and just like you said, man, the instrumentation is so weird. I don't know what instrument you're playing. And I think I spoke to you about that on the phone. Is like, man, I have no clue what some of these instruments are, but the way they play them and the sounds they're getting, the melodies, the chords they're getting, and some of this, like, it's awesome. It's a really good job they did there.
All right, Cody, what is your number 2?
My number 2 is Calm. My only note for this track was, quote unquote, not calm. There are moments and aspects of this song that are calm, but this track is far from calming to me. This track actually makes me feel super uneasy, and I'm not sure why. In the beginning, everything is fine, but the track subtly changes to something more sinister. I think it comes from the heavier piano notes and the weird scratching about halfway through. If this was described as calm in this game, then this game must surely take place in hell. It's just a very off-putting track to me.
off-putting, but hit your number 2 radar. Yikes.
Because off-putting doesn't mean bad. Like
Okay.
it's interesting because I'm out of the two of us, out of me and Peter, I'm the one who I'm like, this doesn't sound like the title name. And this is, I don't know why it's a sticking point to me, but I can get like calm vibes from this. But there was just something that was unsettling. It was uneasy listening to it. Like, yeah, there is a calm tone to it, but there's like this weird undertone that plays throughout this thing that really kind of gave me the creeps.
My notes I put in there were that I definitely thought this would be a song you would pick. And now I'm kind of like bummed that not really your thing. I'm getting that kind of vibe from you. But I also put in there that it kind of gives me like a Donkey Kong type of feeling too. And it's like, I feel like this is maybe something that might be on Donkey Kong. So maybe that's why Cody messes with it so heavy. And that's how I got to be your number 2. But after hearing what you're saying about it, I now got to throw all my notes out on that.
Well, no. You're missing what I'm saying because like a track can be eerie and be good. Like I said on my, I think it was my number 4, comparing it to the Resident Evil soundtrack, which I loved. And that is nothing but more of this. Me saying it's eerie or that it doesn't give me joy, that doesn't mean it's not a good track to me. Like,
okay, I got you. I'm sorry.
Like I love one of my favorite recent docu-series was like Chernobyl. Chernobyl, not a happy time, not at all, but I can appreciate how well done it is. Does that check out a bit?
Yeah, definitely. And also, again, to your point, even in you picking the song, to me, this was another one of those bops from Oldziey and Wentz. They can't miss on this soundtrack, in my opinion. Another solid song.
Cody, you'll find this funny, but for a little while when I was building my list out, I actually had the sister track to this, Storm, on my list. I at least assume they're sister tracks, just given the name, Calm and Storm. But I wasn't a huge fan of this song personally. It was fairly simplistic in nature, and there really wasn't a whole lot to it, given some of the other tracks that I had been listening to at this point. But I definitely understand what you're saying about the feeling of it not being calm by any stretch. On this podcast, when we think of calm, we think of tracks that would help us meditate or fall asleep. So if we're considering that, this would not be anywhere near my top 100 picks.
Is it safe to say like calm right before the storm? Like right before the storm?
I imagine that's probably what they were aiming for.
Yeah, I think it is 1 and 2 on the soundtrack. I'd have to pull it up again, but
yeah, they follow each other.
Yep.
All right, Peter, what's number 2?
My number 2 is called Mission Capstone. There are 4 of these mission tracks on this album, and each one builds into the one after it. The first one is called Evade, which has a very even tempo, a really groovy undertone, and a sound that makes it feel very covert ops like. The second one is Destroy, which changes the pacing and makes it sound a little more dire, as if this mission isn't going to be easy and you'll need to push yourself to get through it. My track is called Capstone, which is basically the summary of all of that brought into one track. I'm not sure if this is an escape or a pursuit track, but it sounds like it could be both. It has this nice mixture of the instruments that were used in the previous 2, the Evade and Destroy, and I really enjoyed that a lot. Of all the tracks that I've put on my list, this is the one that made me feel like I wished I had played the game to have some kind of image in my mind of what is happening here. This was by far one of the most solid tracks that I listen to it and I'm just like, yeah, I really want to know what's happening here.
Kaufman did a bomb job on this one. I simply put in my notes, this song is hard. Oh boy, this is a hard song. It does give you a little bit of everything, but it is that capstone song out of those, evade, destroy, and then you get your capstone and then you move on. So it's like, this song is, again, one of those just super hard tracks that Kaufman put together. I was super pleased with it when I heard it.
Yeah, the underlying tone, I believe, is techno. It's odd because it's barely there, but if you are trying to listen to it, I mean, you can definitely hear it. I like this. I wish I had more context as to what these series of tracks were and kind of what was going on, but going into it blind, that didn't take away from it. It's more of a curiosity at this point because, hey, I haven't played it.
Yeah, this was, like I said, the only track that made me feel that way, partially because it's a 4-parter, right? It's there's definitely something going on here that builds into what it gets to, but you don't know what it is when you haven't played it. And therefore it makes you curious. You really do want to know, how did we get here? What is actually happening here that's making this type of track be in existence? I thought that was a pretty cool feeling. Made me want to know a little bit more.
Yeah, and I was right there with you. It's interesting when you can see that there is a story arc going on just in a soundtrack, just in track titles. We don't get that a whole lot, but I mean, this soundtrack is full of, like we said earlier, brother and sister tracks. I can think of a couple others that are the exact same way, and there's just so many of them to make up this soundtrack that it makes you more interested or curious about what the story actually was.
All right, Duran, we are here at your number one. Let's hear what capped out your list.
It would probably be safe to assume that something from Oldziey and Wentz probably made my number one. But this track in particular, I went in a different direction. It's actually the fourth track of the three you just mentioned, but my number one track is Mission Final by Kaufman. To me, this track is really just the end of the road. Whatever you just been through, this track brings you into that mission complete type of feel. It just feels like you're just finishing the job. Whatever you just did, it's done. We did a great job at doing what we just did. And it just feels super successful. The beat itself is kind of militant. It just feels like you're progressing through. Like, yes, I did it. Yay, look at me go. It's just one of those feel-good tracks. And it also just seems to be one of those ending type of tracks as well. Not to really beat the dead horse with it, but it's just like, whatever you've been through, all the ups, all the downs, you are now done with that. Good job. Move forward, buddy. The good pat on the back.
You nailed it. This is a good track. I'll give you that. This is a good one. What I really enjoyed about it, listening to it, and one of the things that kind of drives home the militant feel that this track kind of gives me personally is the trumpet and all the background horns that are kind of carrying us through this. I didn't find this to be a happy track outside of the game, as someone who hasn't played it. But I can see why you describing kind of how this takes place and your experience with it, why it would be. This is you just beat the boss, good job. It's very much that. And in that, I can see this makes sense and why it would be this high on your list. So no, all that checks out.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
This is another one of those moments where I am sad that I went last because I feel like you guys took all of my notes and just read them for me. But my first thought whenever I heard it was this track just screams that we've arrived at the end. Outside of the title being Mission Final, you could just hear it in all of the notes that are being played. It does sound like a war march with the way that the bass and snare drums kind of hold that beat. All the while the horns are just kind of keeping time along the way. But it's super easy to get lost in the foreground of this song and hear the horns and strings carrying it along. But I think the most impressive part was the percussion, which is actually what surprised me that it didn't really make your list, Cody, because I feel like of all the tracks we've listened to, this one was by far the most percussion heavy, percussion driven, and probably the most technical as far as the percussion goes. I think this is the first time in our podcast that we've actually heard the drums this prominently, doing something more than just providing support or background or something additional to the track. They really do they stand out on their own and provide so much more.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but the drums do happen late track, correct? Like, is that the track I'm thinking of?
No, I think they're pretty much from the start.
Yeah, I would say they kind of started off a little,
Okay. The reason why I was asking was you brought up technical, and I'm like, I heard it, and like obviously it's me, so I heard it, but it wasn't enough to drive the track home for me. I have another track that if I had the choice, I would actually rather listen to. I will say that, the drums in this are great and technical. Don't get me wrong, and I'm not letting that take away from it. But as much as I mention them, it doesn't define a track to me. Like, it doesn't make or break the track. Maybe I would let that joke go on too long or whatever, but I appreciated it. But no, ultimately this didn't end up my list, but it didn't have anything to do with the drums though.
Man, oh man. I thought I was going to get you with this one, Cody. I thought this one would have been the one to bring you over.
I'm surprised it didn't too.
I'm sorry, guys. Here I am, a walking disappointment. You're welcome.
No, I wouldn't say that. But it's like, for me, I've been a fan of you guys from jump, and it's like, I'm like, okay, Cody's going to bite on this one. Okay, Pete is going to bite on that one. And so far, again, none of us have crossed the lines really, other than just our producers being very identical.
All right, Cody, what is your number one?
My number one is Oppression Combat. So this track is crazy long, right? Because of that, these tracks run together for me and I zone out. This one hits differently for me, though. There's a distinct moment at the 10-minute and 17-second mark that is so damn good. There is this frenzied build up that really grabs your attention, letting you know that something good is about to happen. Then the vocals and the bass just keep punching you in the gut over and over again in the best way possible. This little section is the best part of this super, super long track to me.
for me, this is another one of those tracks where the title holds you exactly where it wants you. That combat portion of it is super hard, man. Oh my goodness, this track was hard. I should have picked this one as well, but it didn't make my cut. But this is a hard track. It was like maybe 1/3 of doom mixed with another third of gloom, and then the last third just being hellfire and thrown all into the mix. And like you, Cody, I didn't write down the minute mark, and that's on me. But it did have this great breakdown where everything definitely comes to a head and just goes off. They did so good with that, man. Oh wow, that was a dope track, super dope.
There's not a whole lot I can add into this that I haven't already mentioned with my number 3, the Vindication combat, because the two of them really are very similar, just either two different areas or something like that. But I will say that when I heard Oppression Combat, because it comes on the soundtrack first, I threw it on my list almost immediately. It was there for a while. And had I turned off Vindication Combat at the 4-minute and 18-second mark, Oppression would still be there because I thoroughly enjoyed the different mixes for the loops that they used in Oppression a lot. But the only reason that it didn't make it was because I enjoyed the 2 points that I had mentioned in my track just a bit more. I do love this track a lot. I think it's very well warranted as a number 1 track. And I agree fully that the 10-minute mark shift that you talked about, Cody, is a very welcome change. There is one thing, after I'd heard it a few times, I think that the beat in it can get a little repetitive. I feel like they didn't diversify it as much as they did with Vindication.
Okay, no, that I totally get. And also thank you to you both. When I say that moment, I mean for probably 30 seconds, not until the rest of the track. I'm just talking, there's this one little section that just took me out of my days. And I was like, this is a freaking jam, man. And what's interesting to me personally is that going into this one, I saw those really long tracks. I was like, not one of those is going to make my list. And here it is as my number 1. And going into this, I never would have thought that at all. Peter, what is your number 1?
My number 1 is called Genesis. As promised, bringing us to a close on my list with a Tim Wynn song, because these orchestral pieces never get old for me one bit. Genesis feels very much like a main character revelation where the protagonist is either getting the last bits of the story right before the end of the game, or even a credit roll, possibly. All the same, it is called Genesis, which is another way of saying the beginning. So it could very well be right in the beginning when you start a fresh game and are getting the intro and understanding kind of why Alec is doing what he's doing in this game. But either way, there's no need to really call out anything in particular here because it's just a very masterfully done track. Everything about it sounds like it came from the budget of a multi-million-dollar movie, and I could listen to it all day. My only gripe with this song, and really any of the songs that Tim Wynn did, is something that you, I believe, mentioned, Cody, a while ago, which was that they're all 1.5 minutes. And I wanted so much more than that.
So, Pete, you said this is a Wynn song?
It is, yes.
It sounds like a Wynn song. It sounds like a Peter song. It sounds like one of those ones that I was like, this is going to be a song this kid picks. Clearly, like between your number 5 and now your number 1, I think I had you pretty much pegged. Although I didn't think this order may have happened, I did feel like this screams out Peter. It does bring in your list. Well, it starts and finishes your list with just an epic sounding song. This does sound like movie music. Kind of sounds like the ending of a movie to me, more like roll credits type of song. But it sounds like something you would love. Like this is like definitely a Peter track. I do believe Wynn's scores are just unparalleled. He just goes in, does his job, and gets out of there, but leaves you something breathtaking. I got to give it to you too, man. That's a dope number 1.
Thanks.
Peter, I hate this track. No.
No surprises here.
I know. My honest to God note that I had down whenever I did my very first pass when I heard this track was Halo ? Because this sounds like it could be in Halo to me, and that's not a pun, and I didn't bring up us talking about Halo in the future on purpose or anything, but this sounds so much like a Halo track to me, and it's great. I think the swells in this are really what kind of get me as to why I like it as much as I do and make me feel about it the way I feel. But nah, man, this was a solid pick.
Is it safe to say that Wynn was your parachute through this whole podcast?
If it wouldn't have just made all of my notes really repetitive, I tried to capture as much of the elements of this game that I could possibly fathom without actually having played the game, but I couldn't get away from him. His style and what he put together for, even if it was just cinematic sequences, like there is no way that you could watch any of the CGI in this and not appreciate how much work he put into putting these tracks together. They're grand, epic scale type songs. Like I said, something that sounds like it comes from a multi-million-dollar movie.
Yeah, man. I got to give you that. With Wynn, not only is he your safety net, but he is a beast. He did a great job in this game. I didn't do too much homework on him, and I kind of feel bad now that I didn't. But the way you were feeling about Wynn is the same way I was feeling about Oldziey and Wentz. And to find out when I started to dig a little bit deeper into both of these guys have other projects they worked on together, as well as, different stuff they've done on their own. So I'm sure that somebody probably heard the soundtrack, like what they heard, and hired these guys. These guys, at least those two, the two that I was, champion most of the podcast, as well as Kaufman, who was my number 1. I feel like these guys, because I saw Kaufman's name on a couple of the other projects the other two were involved in. And it's like, these guys know what they're doing when it comes to video game music, sound engineering, as well as just sound designing. So at least that's why they were my go-to through most of my picks.
Well, I think you bring up some good points, because when I was doing some research on these guys, I really couldn't find any information on Oldziey, Wentz, or even Varner. The three of them didn't really have any easily accessible resources for me to find what they did, but Tim Wynn and Jake Kaufman did. And I had mentioned it before, but Tim has worked on movie soundtracks and things like that. So he definitely, that's his home, his safe space, right? He does the movie soundtracks that have the big scores, and that fits really well with those kinds of sequences in games, like where there are cutscenes or some kind of movie that you're watching. Jake Kaufman, on the other hand, has worked on games. He has been very much in the game music industry since 2000. I think his first game he was credited for was Qbert.
Yeah, I wrote that down.
Yeah. So knowing that he's been in games and working in games a lot longer, was probably why he was tasked with more of the like in-game soundtracks, the combat and things like that. Or was it Mission Capstone and Mission Final he worked on?
Yeah, I think Mission Final was mostly just him solo, but the other out of the other 3 tracks, I think it was him, Wentz, and oh my goodness, the other one just slipped my name, Varner.
Yeah, Varner. Yeah, it was interesting to see their backgrounds, but you know, the developers, Volition, they definitely were not pulling punches when it came to this is the third. No, I'm sorry. This is the 4th entry in their series of Red Faction. So they had 1 and 2, they had Armageddon, and they had this one. And of all of them, this is the only one that got remastered. So this is definitely a love child for them, something that they took a lot of pride and time and effort to put together. So it was good to see some of this talent that was working the music.
Yeah, when it comes to that remaster, though, because I didn't follow the composers at all, and I don't know why, because this is the first time where it actually said who composed each track, so I probably should have done that. So that's my bad. But whoever named the remaster needs to be fired, because that is one of the worst names for a remaster I've ever heard.
And it's impossible.
Like remastered?
It's impossible to say. It sounds like you had like a mini stroke every time you say it.
I know, that's why I didn't say it. So
we did prepare this time, and we have a question of the episode, and it's kind of a twofold question. So it's there. We have a question here since we have Duran, who has played this game, and for those who have played the game. And then we have a question for folks like myself and Cody who have not. So for the folks who have played this game, would you recommend this game to anyone at all, fans of first-person shooter games only, or for those who have played the games in the past? And then for those who haven't played, is this soundtrack and what you've heard of it, at least through this episode, enough to make you want to try it? So we're going to start with you, Duran, as somebody who has played the game. Is this something that you could just give to anybody, whether you are a fan of first-person shooters or not? Somebody who is only a fan of first-person shooters or primarily prefers them? Or do you think that you have to have liked the first 2 or 3 Red Faction games in order to enjoy this game fully?
What I'll say to that is this. And in short, yes, I would recommend this to a friend, family, anybody really. But what I will say is, for me, the connection is much deeper because I played the first 2. I will say, for those who are used to first-person shooters, this one is not that. This is your third-person, over-the-shoulder view of your character, just going pretty much crazy. Now that you mentioned Saints Row, I feel like this game probably fits in that mold of just Saints Row-esque, of just that open sandbox style game where you can have fun. But I will say this is the strongest of the Red Faction games I've played. So you're going to still have all those fun, quirky, crazy, explosive weapons, all those things that you could do in the first and second game where you're just blowing a hole into oblivion and just hanging out in there, or just knocking down every building that you want with whatever rocket launcher or C4 charge or grenade. You get to do a little bit of all of that. So again, like I said, my short answer for it is yes. But if you're into any of that stuff I just mentioned, this game is for you. It should be fairly cheap right about now too, because it's been out for a while. But if you do own the Xbox One X, or I don't know if it was on PS4, but I know I have it for Xbox One X. If you own any of the Xboxes or on PC or whatever, it's definitely worth picking up.
How about you, Cody? For someone who hasn't played the game but has listened to the soundtrack now once, possibly twice, was it enough to make you want to try it? And I've got a good feeling I know what your answer is.
Yeah, the answer is no. But I do want to actually look into the story more. Just for this game, though. Like you were saying, I know that if I jump into Gears of War 3, I'm going to miss a lot of the story beats that would make me appreciate, that game so much more. And it's going to be the same here. But just for general context, what I was listening to and what was going on at the time, or the general vibe of the game, yeah, I am more curious about that. But do I want to sink what I'm assuming would be more than 20 to 30 hours into it to kind of figure that out? Not particularly.
Can't blame you there. If it's not for you, it's definitely not for you. But the first two is what sold me into, that Red Faction Guerrilla. That's what sold me into that. So I think that was my connection taking me into, that next title. But like I said, I missed Armageddon altogether.
Well, the good news for Cody is that all the games, including the DLC that came with Armageddon, for $50 on Steam.
Hey, that's a steal.
You can get the whole bundle for $50.
Okay, I will say that is a steal. Absolutely. However, there's no way my computer setup would run that thing. There's just no way. Peter, you know that too. There's no
probably
way
not
that this would be able to happen over here. But I do appreciate it. And I mean, I do have Steam and it is up and kind of running. I'm sure I have to log into it, but PCs are not my forte at the moment, despite having a new one, which is great. But PC gaming, meh.
So the soundtrack didn't sell you guys. Oh, man. What about you, Pete?
Yeah, I was going to say it didn't sell Cody. It sold me. I am actually very interested in picking this up. I found out that it was on Switch, and I do the majority of my gaming now with having a little one at home, family life and things like that. I need something that I can just pick up and put down anytime. And Switch really covers that for me. So I don't have to be bound by the television. I think it is going to be something that I pick up. Although, in all fairness, I do want to get the first and second just for the simple fact that the second would be pretty nostalgic for me. And I've never touched the first ever. So I'd be very curious to see how the story, does it continue along? Is it all intertwined? Or are there just like little tidbits that kind of litter each of them as they go along? I'd be very curious to see that.
The first and the second game, those stories are tied together. Anyone after that, I don't believe so.
Gotcha. If you want to answer these questions or any questions from our past episodes, or just talk about Red Faction Guerrilla with us, you can do so over on our Twitter at Deep Base Podcast, or head over to our Discord where everybody loves Cody more than me. You can find that at discord.deepbasepodcast.com and let us know what you think. With that, gentlemen, we have reached the end of our episode. Cody, thank you as always for co-hosting the podcast with me, even though this will be your last one, actually.
You're welcome, buddy. Anytime.
And Duran, I can't say it enough, man. It's always a pleasure with any aspect of having you hanging out in my life. We've been friends for a long time, so this was a long time coming, but I'm so glad to have had you. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for bringing in a soundtrack that I fully wasn't expecting, but took me by surprise.
Man, that's not a problem. You said it's been a pleasure, man. The pleasure's all mine. I appreciate both of you guys. I love what you guys are doing. Please keep up the good work. Please, please, please have me back when you guys do some Metal Gear Solid. And please, Cody, go out and pick this game up, man.
All right, hold on. I'm going to give you a choice. Am I picking up this or Metal Gear?
Metal Gear. That's
damn it.
That was easy, man.
I enjoy the Red Faction games, but Metal Gear is iconic. You can't not play those games.
Yeah, it's not even close, my guy.
Duran, if anybody is looking to chat with you about this game or any games for that matter, or music in general, because I know you do some music production of your own, where can they find you?
Of course, you can find me on my Twitch at intrepid_1914, but you have to replace that E with a 3, as you so famously put it.
All right, perfect. Well, with that, guys, we're going to head out. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and we will see you in 2 weeks for our next one. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
That's what I wanted. have it on record, by the way, that Cody thinks that Chernobyl is a incredibly sad and horrible time, but it was a very well done time.
It was a well-done docu-series, okay?
I was like, the wording on that came out way wrong.
Oh, shit. You guys know what I mean.
Yeah.